Hey friends, it's Just the Gems. I'm Brandon. I'm really excited about this one. My good friend Emily, aka Orbalology on YouTube, is joining me to talk about the top 10 games that we consider to be peak fiction on the Nintendo Switch. This is more than just an enjoyable story. We're talking games that go hard, that make you feel things that most media simply can't. And if you enjoy this, well, the collab continues. Head on over to her channel for even more. The link's in the description. And while you're here, would you consider liking the video and subscribing? This is a JRPG appreciation channel, so if you like JRPGs, stick around. Now, I'm trying to decide what's the most polite way to begin. Do I let Emily start as the guest, or do I start because otherwise I'm asking her to break the ice? Oh, actually, real quick, one thing. Obviously, we're talking about games that are peak fiction, so we need to cover the basics of the story. There's not going to be anything like a real spoiler in here. We're going to be very careful, but just be warned, we are talking about the plots of these games in a general sense, so just consider yourself pre-warned. Okay, now, Emily, take it away.
Hi everyone, it's Emily from Orbalology, and the first game that came to mind when it comes to peak fiction on the Nintendo Switch is none other than the Xenoblade Chronicles series. Now, 2 minutes is clearly not enough time to go full in depth on the Xenoblade Chronicles series, but I'll do my best to give a little brief summary and make my argument about why these games are so special. It's really cool how all three games are kind of its own unique entity. However, they do sort of merge together towards the end, and you can see a lot of overlapping themes that kind of build on top of each other. So if we go back to the first Xenoblade Chronicles game, that follows a more traditional JRPG storyline where you have all the characters determined to overcome some great evil force, which in this case are these robotic-like creatures called the Mechanis, as well as some other forces that make their efforts seem almost impossible. And throughout this game, it's really satisfying to see Shulk, as well as the other characters, overcome their own fates and challenge what is supposedly predetermined, and allow them to make their own path through hard work and determination. Xenoblade Chronicles 2, on the other hand, revolves more around overcoming nihilism. The core theme really revolves around accepting your own limitations and finding your own sense of purpose and meaning in life. So this is all done through the power of love and friendship, and I found it all extremely touching, and I really appreciated the more character-driven focus for the second game. So while all these themes in the storyline wasn't as heightened or as epic as the first game, how the story was more character-driven, I think just made you feel a lot more connected to the characters, and that's also why I have so many figures of the second game, because I just really felt attached to them. And then finally, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 kind of takes both themes from the previous two entries and merges them in a unique way. I would say that the themes lean a little bit more towards the first games, and the characters are pursuing their own hopes and dreams and not being complacent, and also just kind of striving for a better future. And what's really cool about the Xenoblade franchise on the Switch is how everything is pulled together with the Future Redeemed DLC. It's just so satisfying to see everything come together and seeing all the different characters interact with one another, and also how it harkens back to the previous Xeno franchises that I've yet to play. Found it a very satisfying way to wrap up the series, and I'm really excited to see what Monolith Soft has in store for the future.
If you're ever in the mood to feel like your heart has been run over by a bus, check out To the Moon. For some of you, that might be a strong enough endorsement that I don't need to say anything else. For others, though, you might be thinking, that sounds awful. Why would I want that? Let me put it this way. Really good art uses its medium and its component pieces to move us in some way. To the Moon uses its medium, specifically a video game, and its art, the things like its graphics, its music, and its writing, to create a feeling in us. In some games, the feeling the designers are trying to move us toward is something like a feeling of accomplishment. Like if I could just nerf the most noobs? That doesn't sound quite right. But you know what I mean, yeah? The act of achieving is what the developer is striving to create in us. To the Moon doesn't literally make us feel bad, but it exposes us to some heavy experiences that can create empathy in us and rewards us with a story that is absolutely stunning. A bit about the game might be in order. You play as doctors Ava Rosaline and Neil Watts, who work for Sigmund Corp, a company that creates artificial memories for people on their deathbeds. It's like the group from Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, except Instead of erasing heartache, they're creating happy memories that never happened. Their patient is an old man in a coma named Johnny Wiles. Johnny's biggest regret is that he never got to go to the moon. The gameplay involves solving simple puzzles to connect objects from Johnny's memory so that you can travel between the different eras of his life. Along the way, you learn some things about his past, including some repressed and damaged memories that you have to repair. And of course, you learn about why he wanted to go to the moon, and how that's all connected to his somewhat complicated relationship with his wife, River. So this is very much a story-based game. There isn't really a fail state that I'm aware of. It's a guided experience, so if you're looking for a challenge, this ain't it. But honestly, if you're watching my channel with any sort of regularity, you know I'm not the looking for a challenge type, so this probably doesn't surprise you. There's so much good stuff in here, from its exploration of regret to what might be the only legitimate portrayal of Asperger's syndrome I've ever seen in a video game. It's a short and tidy experience. You should be able to get through it in 3 or 4 hours. If you have an afternoon free, grab this on the Switch and get ready to feel some things.
Fire Emblem is a franchise that is well known for its lore, but Three Houses sort of deviated from the traditional Fire Emblem formula and really amped up its storytelling in a way that really resonated with a lot of fans. There are 3 distinctive paths that you could choose from the beginning, as well as an extra one if you purchase the DLC. And each path has a very distinctive theme that it explores. This route approach lends itself to high replayability and packed full of content that I myself haven't actually finished all the routes, but I do know that each route has a very distinctive theme to it. Whether it's seeking justice, starting a revolution, seeking out the truth, or having some moral dilemmas, the stories that feature in each of these routes allows the players to really fully grasp what is going on in this new world. While this Fire Emblem entry is well known for its focus on story, I think the characters are really what set it apart. There's so many opportunities to get to meet and interact with these characters and get to form a sense of intimacy that we really didn't have with prior Fire Emblem entries. While each different house path has its own unique story, I think it really comes down to the characters you meet along the way that carry it. And I found myself connecting with so many different characters and seeing all of the hardships that they go through. And it was really heartbreaking seeing some of the endings. But overall, I think Fire Emblem Three Houses really is peak when it comes to Fire Emblem storytelling, especially through the lens of various characters.
Yoko Taro is a very weird genius. Emphasis on very weird. One thing about him is that he is very good at telling a compelling story in the video game medium. It's entirely possible to tell a very good story in a video game without really utilizing the medium itself in any particularly unique way. But Yoko Taro takes advantage of every aspect of the video game-ness of the game to tell the story. Nier Automata is a case in point for this. You'll have to see the credits roll multiple times in order to experience the story completely, but you won't be replaying the game multiple times. It's a bit strange. But again, Yoko Taro. To sum it up in a spoiler-free manner, you play as an android fighting a war against alien machines 10,000 years in the future. The humans that you're fighting to protect are hundreds of thousands of miles away on the moon, so every interaction you have is with some sort of artificial life form. And yet the game does more to explore what it means to be human than almost any other game I've ever played. The androids try to maintain an emotionless state, despite the fact that they look and almost are just like humans. This is a game that forces you to actually take a look at yourself and decide what kind of person you want to be. And you don't just experience this vicariously through the android characters in the game. No, Yoko Taro actually asks you, the player, to do something. Again, I don't want to spoil anything because I think it's incredibly beautiful what the game does. But it legitimately asks you if you're willing to make a sacrifice. A real, actual sacrifice to help someone you'll never meet. It's eye-opening, and it's the perfect capper to one of the best works of fiction in games.
Transistor is a hauntingly beautiful story about tragedy, and the overall atmosphere and environment lends itself to an innovative way of storytelling where there's a lot of showing rather than telling. The story is set in a dystopian-like future where you have the main character, Red, fleeing for her life, and trying to escape. The story is not told directly through her, but rather through her weapon, who narrates what is going on in front of her and kind of gives her a sense of direction of where to go. Despite having narration, the storytelling is actually more subtle, where it's mostly through the environment and from those who have fallen that you get to piece together what's really going on. So I thought it was really cool that Red was able to acquire these multiple abilities through those who had died, and she gets to learn a little bit more about them and their backstory and personalities, and take them along with her through her journey. And because everything's very subtle and not straightforward, to get the whole experience, you actually have to play this game multiple times through the New Game Plus mode, so that you can kind of really piece together more of what happened to Red before the fact and how she relates to the rest of this world she's stuck in. And through this recursive storytelling, the themes of dealing with grief and tragedy really come through, and leaves the player, I think, with a very satisfying conclusion. Whereas if you just play it through it once, you really don't get the whole picture. The art style, of course, is beautiful, and the hauntingly beautiful OST sung by Ashley Barrett is just out of this world, and it's a story that will stick to you for a long time.
The house in Fata Morgana is a trip. Seriously, it's an incredibly wild ride. And that's saying something, because the house in Fata Morgana is a visual novel, meaning there really isn't much in terms of gameplay to speak of here. The fact that it's able to be so compelling isn't just this amazing story, though obviously that's what I'm going to focus on, but its combination of story with gorgeous art and hauntingly amazing music. It's hard to talk about a game like this without giving anything away, so I'll try and keep this surface level. The story begins with a spirit entering an old, seemingly abandoned mansion. The spirit has amnesia, which is actually a brain disorder as I understand it, so I'm not super clear on how a bodiless spirit can actually have amnesia, but I digress. This amnesiac spirit meets a maid in the mansion. The maid begins to show the spirit around, entering memories of the mansion's past, which serve as basically short stories that all come together in the end to tell the overall tale of the mansion, the spirit, and the maid together. This is the video game equivalent of a page turner. Seriously, when things start happening here, you cannot put it down. The atmosphere of each story may differ quite a bit from each other. In one, you're in the 17th century among an aristocrat family. In the next, you're in the 19th century witnessing the story of a greedy businessman and his put-upon wife, just as a couple examples. But all these atmospheres come together to create the sort of bizarrely unique tapestry that the house in Fata Morgana weaves. If you've never played a visual novel and you're at all interested in the medium, this is the game to start with. It was my first true visual novel too, and it really opened my eyes to what the medium can do.
AI the Somnium Files starts out as your typical murder mystery visual novel, where you have to follow certain clues and interview different people to figure out who the culprit of this gruesome murder is. But what's made AI the Somnium Files currently my favorite visual novel of all time is the amount of depth and different layers you kind of have to peel away with each different route as you tease out what's really going on. The story also interjects a lot of great humor, often breaking up the rather dark and disturbing plot points with some of the over-the-top humor, as well as a little bit of pervy humor as well, just to kind of lighten up the storytelling and really make you connect with the characters. I think AI the Somnium Files has one of the best route progressions I've seen in a visual novel, and I just love how intentional each of the routes are, with kind of piecing together the puzzle of what's really going on beyond the surface level of your typical murder mystery. I definitely won't go into spoiler territory here because there's some really cool elements that you learn along the way. Throughout the story, there are also a lot of different puzzle and interactive elements that can be a hard pass for some people, but I definitely encourage everyone, if you enjoy good storytelling and just over-the-top craziness, definitely give AI the Somnium Files a shot. Most of the puzzles are not too bad, and if there's any that give you a hard time, there are a lot of great guides out there to kind of help walk you through it so that you can get back to enjoying the story and watching it unfold.
Omori is a dark game dressed up in colorful clothes, a deep exploration of grief and loss masquerading as an Earthbound clone. As an Earthbound clone, it's phenomenal. It understands what makes a game like Earthbound so charming, and it puts its own spin on that charm, creating something that is obviously inspired by that classic game, but that possesses an identity fully its own. At the same time, it has an important story to tell, and it balances the silly with the serious in telling it. Even the silly is tinged with darkness if you know where to look for it. All that to say, Omori is deep and complex and definitely not for everyone. The subject matter itself delves into a bunch of territory that many would label with copious trigger warnings. If you're worried about that, I encourage you to give it a Google before you try it out. The game is essentially divided into two parts that alternate. In one, you play as Omori, a young boy going on magical adventures with his friends in a fantasy world. You battle spider rabbits and dial-up internet and squizzards, that's squid wizards. You're on a quest to find your lost friend Basil, who vanished mysteriously one morning. In the other part, you play as Sunny, a somewhat older boy who looks an awful lot like Omori. As Sunny, you find yourself in a very normal house, in a very normal town, and you do very normal things. Go to the store, get a part-time job, and deal with bullies who are making life difficult for your old friend Basil. Yes, it's pretty clear from very early on that what you're seeing in these two halves of the game are the imaginary world in the mind of Sunny and the real world he finds himself living in. In the imaginary world, he's surrounded by his friends. In the real world, his friends are scattered, disconnected from each other. Finding out exactly what happened to leave them this way becomes the central mystery of Omori. And even if you figure it out early, it doesn't detract from the overall impact of the story. If you can stomach the subject matter, you need to give Omori a try. It's unforgettably good.
30 Sentinels Aegis Rim is probably one of the most difficult games to talk about on this list because really most players should go in completely blind so that all the surprises and things that happen throughout the story have a more impactful meaning. So I will talk about this game rather cautiously. This is a time-traveling sci-fi story where you're first introduced to some characters from the 80s residing in Japan. And I found it really refreshing how you're able to follow the stories and paths of these 13 individuals and kind of sharing how they came into the story and see things through their lens. And through everyone's individual perspectives, you sort of piece together what's really happening on Earth and how it relates to the RPG side of things, where you have all these different characters inside these robotic sentinels and defending different zones on Earth and fighting off these enemies. I think Vanillaware did something really special here, and while some of the sci-fi elements throughout the story are rather typical of the genre, I think there's a good balance of some surprises and just rich storytelling that makes everything a very satisfying experience, and is one that I think many still consider as peak fiction.
I thought I'd gotten all the trails out of my system with my recent Where to Start Playing Trails video, but come on, I can't stop talking about trails. Any discussion about peak fiction has to include what I've called my favorite story of all time in any medium. And special thanks to Emily for letting me take this one without beating me up. There are 10 mainline Trails games out in North America right now, and unlike most long-running series, these games all tell one long, continuous story. To make it more tenable for the audience, though, the story itself is broken up into distinct arcs. Those arcs are the Sky Trilogy, the Crossbell Duology, and the Cold Steel Quartet. If you're good at math, you'll have realized that's only 9 games, and that's because the 10th game, Trails into Reverie, the most recent entry, acts as a sort of capper for this first major part of the story. The Trails games tell the story of the continent of Zemuria, with each arc taking place in a different country within that continent. The games tell both big picture style stories about these various governments and the wars and conflicts they find themselves in, as well as more personal and intimate stories about the cast of main characters you control. Typically, you'll find your path through the story weaving in and out of these major sorts of events as you simultaneously try to resolve whatever world crisis is happening, while also dealing with the machinations of Ouroboros, a secret society that seems to have some sort of dastardly plan running through every major event in the series. The plots of each arc are pretty universally brilliant on their own, But where Trails really shines to me is in the interconnectedness of it all. Characters from one arc will show up in another, and not just as brief cameos, but as pivotal characters. Events in two different arcs might take place in parallel to each other, giving you a new perspective on a major event you thought you really understood the first time around. Seeing the world continue to grow and evolve from the beginning of Trails in the Sky through the end of Trails into Reverie is a wonder, a real achievement in video game storytelling. Please, if you are at all interested in JRPGs, and if you like good stories, give the Trails series a try. You can check out my video on the best Trails series entry points, or at the very least, grab the first game in an arc and give it a try. Although, since this is a Switch-specific video, the best recommendation I can give you at this point is to pick up Trails from Zero. It's a fantastic game in its own right, and it's the first entry in one of the most beloved arcs in the whole franchise. You won't regret it. So, those are our picks for Peak Fiction on the Nintendo Switch. What are some games that you'd consider Peak Fiction? Let us know down in the comments. Like I mentioned at the top, our collaboration continues over on Emily's channel, Orbology, so click the link in the description and go check it out if you haven't already. Emily, thanks again for putting this together with me. It was a ton of fun. I hope you all enjoyed watching it as much as we enjoyed making it. Anyway, please consider liking and subscribing and all that good stuff. And until next time, bye.